So we are ready to dive into the second version of this Open Vista image. And the true purpose of this really is to address the color issues of light. So early in the morning, the light is blue. As the sun comes up, it gets a lot warmer. And then again, when it gets even higher up, the sun gets neutral. And we looked at that process in the introduction to this and also in the color prerequisite. So you just want to retouch it out so you could see two pictures that is the same picture in story and location, but quite different when it comes to the mood and the color palette of the photography. So we're going to do this quite quick. We're not going to spend as much time as we did on the darker bluer version. I already cut out the horse and our talent. Obviously, you don't want to go too many times into masking and spending hours of you looking at me doing that kind of work. I'm sure you could practice that on your own and finesse it as you go along. So we're going to quickly take this background plate, stitch it together with this, which is the same process as we did in the first image. Now here, for the light hitting just the top of the mountains, I didn't really have the time to get the horse in and out of the photograph. I could have taken the time, but I kind of struggled in getting this talent to relax and be cold and feel comfortable. You can just see it in this photograph. This could have been just one deal and it would have been done, but it wasn't quite connected. It was the horse and the guy and not the two of them together. Remember I talked about this on location? These two elements felt like they were competing and not one. So then I thought, oh, I can put it up here in the background. But it kind of came together later on when they put themselves like this. So we're going to take this element here and put it on top and retouch them out. We're going to take this foreground element right in here. And then we're going to add him in here. This is our cloud that we're going to work with. So for this image, 7 elements that we're going to use to stitch it together. So I'm excited. We're going to dive right into it and follow the same process as we did for the other picture. We're going to hit the tab key, which will bring up our palettes at the end. And I'm going to hide some of these so they don't clutter up the screen as we record this for you. So we'll start over in this end. Same process, double click the background layer so that we can unlock it, ready for us to modify. We call it for left panel. We increase our canvas and we're going to do this just random 33 because it's easy. And then we're going to go up from here to about 17. We don't know if this is going to be the right size, but it gives us a starting point anyway. File number 2, I'm going to just drag it in. Again, I have my lasso tool, which I use a lot. I just hold down my command key, which shifts it again into the move tool, and it's just to drag it over. If this goes too fast, I apologize, but I feel like we've been doing this quite a few times. Again, the process is coming down here, adding a layer mask, coming up here, the selection tool, starting out right here in the middle, hoping we find a middle ground that is fairly easy to connect when it comes to adding these frames to each other. So right about here. I think maybe I took it a little bit too far, so we're going to make another one of these and do the other way. But there always is a center piece or a center line where the things line up pretty good. There's a distortion obviously to different frames when you turn the camera, and this here where I found is pretty darn close. You see it's okay close right on the mountains, and it's not too much discrepancy on the bottom. So we're going to make our right frame a tiny bit bigger, and I think that will actually do it. I think that's pretty darn close. Pretty darn close. As you see, there's a tiny bit of shift here in several things. One is focus. It's a little softer on the left side. So we're going to sharpen up the left side a tiny bit. Solution in the end might be to soften the mountains a tad to match. In the background, remember, we're going to change the foreground in this and only going to use the mountains. So this is totally fine with me. Now, it might also just be the fall off on the lens, because you see here, it's a lot sharper than way at the end here where we try to blend. So it might just be the sharpness of the lens not being good enough at the edges. So a little kick to Canon right there for not making lenses that sharp all the way to the edges. Anyhow, we're going to continue our blend. We see there's a little bit of discrepancy in density as well. So we're going to come up here and we're going to darken a tiny bit the left-hand frame, connecting them. I'm going to use my arrow keys and pull back a little bit on that blend layer. And we see that feels a tiny bit better right away. I'm going to call this for blend. And that's kind of it. What I would do to do this perfect, I'm going to move a little faster today, but as you saw me do with the prior image, I don't really like the sharp lines when it comes to masking. They're easier for the eye to detect than something that just bleeds. So I guess I could do this really quick. And again, I would try to follow some lines. So we go outside of that tree. Maybe we keep these in here. Sharpness is getting worse this way though, so maybe I'll come in and just blend into this grass where it's not too many hard edges and easier for me to blend. All right, there it is. The mandatory crop layer, again, for me to reset the palette and have something that's white around the color edges of the photograph. So Command-Shift-I for that selection, and we're going to fill it with white. Again, Command-Delete, which fills with our background color. So here we are. This picture is awfully long, so I might crop off some of this edge right here. These mountains is what I love. I don't like this area as much. Then we're going to bring in the part that will cover up the sky. So here's this frame. I'm going to drag this in, close that out. So this is shot from a slightly different perspective. As you can see, if I line this up right here, the mountains come lower and this comes lower. So it's hard for me to guess, but I would say I would be standing on this photograph tall at 6 feet taking this picture, and here I was probably on a tripod height sitting down on my Apple box. And that's the difference between these two frames essentially. So we're going to make it a little bigger, and then we're going to skew it a little bit so that we can overlay it right in here and blend the two frames together. So we're going to pull it underneath our crop layer. We're going to add a layer mask, and then we're going to take away the things we don't want by selecting what we want and invert that selection. Again, delete it. Not delete it, fill it with black on the layer mask. So Option Delete to fill it with the foreground color. So you're going to layer that on top, and then we're going to make that a bit bigger. I'm going to put this at an opacity so I could see a little bit better what's going on here. So here's the cracks in the mountains are lining up okay. So they need to be a little bit bigger. And as you see now, if I line the pieces up right there, you can see the shadow and ghosting on these edges here. That tells me that I should come a little bit taller. I'm doing this to try to see these other pieces here. They start to line up out in here. And because the perspective and the camera height is a little different, I would need to squish this frame a little bit to make pieces line up. So we're going to start there and put the opacity back to 100. Obviously we don't want to see the cowboy in there, so we're going to erase some of this out. And then we can come in here. We don't need these pieces for sure. There's also a little discrepancy obviously in warmth, and we're going to sort that out in just a minute. You can come in here. Now that we see this, it's a little bit easier to blend these together. Again, curves is our friend. We come into this menu right here, we pick our curves, we make it darker to start. And that is just pulling down the RGB. It's obviously too blue in here, so we're gonna come down to our blue layer and do less blue. Fill this with a little bit of yellow. Now that we see it's getting too much yellow in here, and it's a combination of things always. So I'm gonna add a tiny bit of red in there. And I think that's pretty close. What's missing is a little bit of punch to it, really, a little bit of contrast. So maybe pull down another anchor point here in the RGB area. And I think that did it quite well. It's a little bit yellow. So again, down to the blue layer, and we pull this up. About there. As we blended the foreground, the background blend did not get any better. So what we need to do is to mask out the background and create another blend for our background layer. So for now, we're roughly going to do this. And then we're going to delete or go option delete and fill that with black. And then we're going to create another mask with the same area. And then we're going to come in here and try to blend just the background mountain. You got to connect these layers for sure so that we only affect this part of the mountain and not what's outside of it. It's too pinkish in this area if you compare the two, and it's also not quite as dark as it should be. So we're going to create some darkness first, and then we're going to start coming into the red channel and add a little bit of cyan, the opposite of red. And that feels better for the background. And now you can see how far off we really are on the perspective on these two. So there's definitely some work here to get around it. So to start, we're going to rotate this plate a little bit, as I see that we need a little bit of rotation to line this up a little better. The horizon line is sitting too high, so we're going to try to get rid of as much as we can of this mountain horizon line. Obviously this piece can go away as well. Huh. All right. I think we're pretty darn close. There are some discrepancies in here, but they are going to be fairly easy to correct. We are going to put our foreground guy in here. So before I start finessing this, we want to see where our talent ends up. So you're going to just zoom into this a tiny bit. As we saw here, the horse's ass started to show up, so we needed to get rid of that for sure. So the issues we have now is right in here, and that is pretty much it. But for that, I feel these pieces are lining up pretty darn good. It's a little bit more warmth in here. So let me see if it's just warmth or if it's just maybe a little depth and contrast. That feels a little bit better when it comes to connecting this face with this face. So there's highlights along here, a little bit more density here. I'm going to take it back a tiny bit. Right about there. This is our background. The next stage in this will be to add our sky, and that's what we're going to bring in Now, I've already put it together roughly. What we have in this little area here is obviously the left and right panel, and then I had to deepen this here because it's going to fall into this corner here, and then a little bit of hue saturation and a little bit of a blend copy. So which is just a little density and a tiny bit of color. So we're going to drag our sky in here and see how this lines up. It got to come on top of the mountain blend, and we're going to reconnect that. I'm going to name these layers before it gets too unruly. I'm going to call this one Blend Ground, and you're going to call the other one Blend Mountain. So again, we're going to follow the selection process that we did last time. You're going to come into these layers here. Why don't we just, for now, just call them background or backplate. And we're going to use our magic wand. I come in here and just I love when we have selections this easy to create. It's a lot of fun. So we're going to zoom out so we can see the whole picture. Again, as we talked about before, we can just delete this for now. As we talked about before, it's easy now to just take this whole area. We just hold down the shift key so that we can add the top to the bottom selection that we just did. So we come into our sky, we select it, and we just now click the layer mask, and with the selection we already had, this will fall into place quite beautifully. You're going to come into these layers, select them and move them together to a place where we feel it lines up beautifully with our photograph. Okay, we'll start right here. As I mentioned, this is pretty darn wide, so I'm just going to take our crop layer, and instead of expanding the sky, we'll just push this in a tiny bit like that. The sky obviously travels taller than this, so why don't we just expand our canvas right away and just see if we can include more of the sky. Now we don't get to see more of the sky, and the reason for this, when we make a mask the way I did by selecting first and then clicking on the layer mask, you see the top of the sky is blacked out. So what we want to do is come up here, and you want to undo that by putting some white in there so you can reveal the whole top area of this mask. Then we can take our crop and we can move it up, and we can include the whole sky that we have to look at. All right. Now the two feels a little discrepant here. So what I did in the past was to soften this by giving it an opacity. I think as we retouch this now, to make this a little simpler, we're going to take down the saturation. We click here. I'm just going to tone down our saturation so it gets to a place where we feel really good about the blend of the two. In this blend layer, I think maybe we should add a tiny bit more red to it. There. Those are the small adjustments I like to make initially so that I can feel that these layers, so to speak, fit well together as we get into it. This feels really dense right here. So we're going to do something similar to what we did in the nighttime version by coming in and giving this another layer group. I'm going to add another mask here. This mask will then always be the sharp mask for the mountains, but then I can create another mask, and I can create a big brush, add an opacity, and just slowly brush in here. And this way I will blend, creating an opacity between what was originally there and what I want to put on top. So now these guys just morph into each other, I feel, in a better way. So that's where we're going to start. Maybe we should add a little yellow to this as well. In our blend copy, come down to the blue layer, which is opposite of yellow, and we just push that down a bit. There. There. And I think for the contrast, we don't really need that. A softer sky is nicer. I'm going to save this as we go along. I'm going to call this for VIP1, which is work in progress 1, Photoshop file, and it goes into the folder where I have all the parts and pieces for this. All right. Even if this has a little bit more vibrancy to it, I still want to make it early morning. I don't want it to be all just super bright and happy. So we're going to come above our sky layer. And we're going to make all this a little bit darker. Right about there for now. Gives us a little bit more of the feeling that I'm looking for. Before I start fine-tuning any of this, we want to put more of the parts and pieces that's going to come into it. That means this foreground and the river. So let's just pull those up. I really felt when I looked at these that this could be a beautiful image in its own, but I didn't want it to be quite as bright and happy. If you look at this exposure, if I pull this down, it's really quite lovely. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful location. And when I stood up there, I thought, oh wow, this could be a completely different image. So just want to show you that there's possibilities when you shoot one thing to think about another and maybe creating some backplates for a completely different idea. But we're not going to do that today. We are going to stick to the program and work with this idea and this motion and all that stuff that I'm trying to teach you, coming from the heart and then executing idea that speaks to that. So we're going to increase the canvas of this, and we're going to add this background and drag it into here. We're going to close that out, and we don't need to save that curve. And again, the same process, line them up roughly, add a layer mask. About a third in, we try to stitch these together. I'm going to turn this a tiny bit. The horizon lines here don't quite line up. I'm going to turn this one the other way. Let's see, maybe I pulled this too far over. I'm going to fill this with white. So I think these are shot with a wider lens. That's why they don't line up as well. The wider the lens, the more distortion you have, and the worse it's going to be for you to do these panels. So when you shoot these things, if you shoot with a long lens, they just line up perfectly. If you have 100mm or something like that, shooting these panels, they just fall into place. And at that time, you can actually use the Photoshop stitching software. It will go really quick. But when you shoot wide like this, those stitching software are just terrible. So here we are doing it manually, just real quick, just down the middle, softening that edge a bit so it's not so straight. Okay, this will be, I'm going to call this for blend for now. I'm going to put this into a folder, and this will be foreground. I'm going to hit Command Save for this, just so I have it. I'm going to drag it into our image, and we're going to wait for the last 5% to save, and we're going to close that out. I'm going to make these windows a little bit bigger for you. We're going to lower this down, and right in here we're going to replace this beautiful texture landscape with the water, just as we did for the nighttime, and we're going to add this in the foreground. So let's see, a layer mask. Again, we're just going to go straight down the center. It's close. And now that I see this, I see there's a rotation to this background as well. So we're going to take this whole background that we created, and then we're going to rotate it a tiny bit. See, this file is a little bit bigger than the other, so we're just going to shrink it down so that it fits okay. Or maybe not. Maybe I will need to push this way. No, let's just start here. This feels pretty good. Maybe I'll shrink it down even a little bit more. If you compare the background here, it's a little bit smaller, but I think that's okay. Cool. So what we need to do now is to connect these pieces. Obviously we need to take this away as we don't want to look at that. So there's also a denser mask up here, which looks nice for this cloud, to be honest. It's another mistake that feels pretty good. So when you look at the top of the part of the cloud, when I turn on and off this layer, it kind of affects it. So we need to create a layer mask up here to undo that, but keep that darkness in mind so that we can revisit that afterwards and maybe make this darker as well. I'm just going to select right in here. I'm going to get rid of the guys here from RGG that was filming so beautifully. Honestly, the cinematography on this tutorial is really quite exquisite, really quite beautiful. I'm so impressed with all the work that they put into capturing the scenes of all this and the flavor in a really, really beautiful manner. So obviously a little bit color discrepancy, and we're going to work on that. We're going to put this foreground on normal so that it doesn't affect what we do underneath, and come in here and work on that color a tiny bit. I do like the green, to be honest, so we're not going to change it too much. We definitely need to, combine the feeling of the rock, but this part is really quite nice. So let's see what we can do here. I'm going to put a little bit of red in there, and we're going to add a little density through RGB, and look at that. It's not too bad already. I'm going to keep on pulling on this. A little bit further maybe. Tiny bit of contrast. I like it already. A little bit more red. Just about there. I'm going to call this for blend 2. So I forgot there was a blend here already. But when you look at these two, the first only deals with density, and the other deals with density and contrast. This would have been really bad if I had pushed this up and this one came down. But since they're both pulling in the same direction, we're just going to leave them as is for now. As long as they don't work against each other, pixelation should be fine. So I'm going to just come in here and again, briefly, and just lower this a tiny bit. Work our way into the background. And I like the discrepancy in tone here that happens. So I'm going to push a little bit more green back in there. And now I obviously work looking pretty far out, and we need to come in here again later to fine tune this, but just trying to get the pieces in there in a beautiful manner to start so that we get a sense of what's going on, and then again we fine tune afterwards. So now I'm just exploring again, as we've done with the sheets and the prior image at nighttime, just finding these crevices or these places in the rocks where it's a natural connection. And I think we kind of have this right here. I'm going to follow this line all the way up here. See, this is not as good when we come into this space right here. Another thing that happens, to be honest, is quite nice because the foreground of this backplate was kind of out of focus. You see we lose the focus here, and the focus is set right on this rock. So when we bring this in, we get a little bit more foreground focus, which is really good for us. So I'm going to come back on this and get the guys out of there. Maybe we keep some of these rocks. Again, this is not quite sharp enough. So maybe we could just cheat this and chop it right in here, right before those guys show up. I think that's fine. But then look close at it, it's not too bad. So, and if it gets too bad, we can just take a rock and put it in front of this and sort of mask out these edges. Oh, I wanted to keep that shadow right there because that's what makes it feel like it's really sitting into the landscape that's underneath it. Nice. Okay. All right, not bad. So we think I need a little bit, work right in there to mask it out, but not a bad start. Not a bad start. This rock edge here need some love, obviously, to make that nice and beautiful. So we're going to visit that a little bit. Since we already have done this once, adding a foreground and background to a very similar picture in the nighttime version, I'm not going to do this to the fullest. I think the idea here of working with color and blending pieces to make this vision come to life is what we should focus on. So you get the masking process, I'm sure, by now. So I'm going to come down in here. Again, it's that magic fill the other way. And again, I love this little piece of water. That's a good one. This edge here is obviously too clean. So let's turn that off and see what's underneath. I need to take away this up here as well. Maybe we shouldn't take away. Maybe we should keep adding to it. So yeah, not bad. Again, looking for some edges here that I could use to make this a little bit less uniform. And there are some edges here. They just need to be crisper. I'm using a really big brush here, and that does not quite work for this area. All right. Okay, let's start there. Feels a little flatter than I want. So we're going to come in here and maybe push some contrast in it. So we talked about this in the introduction. We create an S curve on the RGB channel, and that will help us create contrast within the frame, pushing up our highlights and pushing down the density. So I'm just toggling here, doing Command C, and you see this arrow point moves up and down just to see where I'm at. Then we're going to come down here and just see what that did. Now that I look at it, I actually kind of like it better the way it was. So we're going to do it more subtle. We're going to move our anchor points by using the plus key and then just push down that a couple of notches and up one notch. And I think that will settle my craving for a little bit more contrast in the bottom. So as we have moved this around, I noticed that, we have more real estate really underneath this frame. So you're going to go here, canvas size. This is becoming a really big file. Again, we have a 150 megabyte flat file by extending the files like I do. So if anyone asks if there's enough resolution to shoot a commercial job on a 5D, the answer is a ringing yes. A 150 megabyte flat file is a really, really solid file that you could print almost anything with. So we are in very good shape if you are looking at technical sides to the 5D. I'm going to push this down for now as much as we can. There. I really like this foreground grass. It's really quite lovely. I take away the crap by cropping it a little bit. And I'm going to start massaging this a little bit more. I'm going to take a look at this blend layer again, because I did kind of like the greenness in here. So what we're going to do is to come to our blend layer, and I think maybe we just come in here and select it real quick. I could just roughly brush it in as well, but let me just do this real quick. And I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to pick a 50% gray, maybe a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to fill that, instead of with black this time, with that gray. And as you see, we get a gray in here, which will give us a little bit more opacity. It won't be completely black, and we will see some of the color underneath it. So essentially we're affecting this area fully and this area halfway. And maybe it's too much. So this is a point in retouching where we make these critical decisions for the picture. Reds and greens are opposite, or cyan and red is opposite, green and magenta is opposite. They're in families, these two, they're not too far apart. So when you look at this, you got to reassess. Do you want a picture that has those opposing colors, or do you want a picture that's more monochromatic? Obviously, if I do this, I have a picture. I'm going to hide that edge. I have a picture that's more monochromatic, where the green doesn't stand out as much. And if I choose to push that green a bit, now there's a more of a contrasting color rather than a family of colors. And I think for this, which is part of my flavor in photography, I hear a lot that I have this very painterly palette, and part of creating a painterly palette really is finding a family of colors and pushing it that way, because it becomes monochromatic. Still have a lot of color, but it's a family of those colors and not opposing colors as much. So just to have this and play with it, for now, we're just going to come in here and we're going to disable the layer mask. To do this, it's just to hover right over the mask, hold down the control key, push it down, and you will get this submenu. So here you could do a lot of different things, but what we want to do is just disable or enable the layer mask for now. So now that we've done this, we know that we can play with it later, turn it on and off. For now, I do think that we're just going to turn it off and stay with that more monochromatic palette, giving a warmth to the green that's down in the valley. All right, it's starting to feel pretty darn good. We're going to hit Command R and we're going to take away our ruler for now. It's just distracting, sitting up there. Here we have our cowboy, and I have fussed around with this a little bit with multiplying the horse here, as you see underneath that we did. It's all multiplied like we did with the nighttime horse right up in here. And we cut him out at a decent level. So then when we come here and put him in, he should fall into place decently. So there's some color discrepancies here, obviously. So we're going to play with that and massage it in there better. What I want you to be aware of in some ways is that I put him on a very similar surface. I think actually standing on some of these rocks very similar to this. So I'm going to put him down in here, maybe, roughly. What I would like for him here, though, in this picture, is to truly break the horizon. It would be nice. Maybe put his head right into the crevice here. It's a really awesome tool when it comes to placing images into background to have them break the horizon line. What we could do here, if this feels too much, you could just cut this down even more so it cuts into the shoulders instead of being right at the neck. For now, we're just going to leave him right where he is. So we're going to come in here to the cowboy, and right above here, we're just going to work with it and make him a little bit darker. And I like this as I make this picture overall darker as well, to be honest. This is not bad. So I want to look at the sky as well. As the sky gets darker, it feels better. So let me see if we come into another contrast layer here. Just push the clouds down a bit. I like this. Makes more sense with the lantern as well. I wonder if you're going to push the warm color even more and use the tool that I've shown you several times now by setting a color. And this is one of my favorite colors to use here, this little mustard tone. I'm going to come in here, put that on color, and tone this down. Just see what happens. And I mean, immediately I feel this has, I just talked about Painterly Palette. This really does it for me. Really pulls this together to a more of a painting than anything. Maybe it's too much, but at least it gives the picture a flair that it didn't have before. So it's at 15 now. Maybe we'll take it down to 11. Or maybe we push it even further. Maybe it's more like this. Quite exciting. Overall, maybe we could push this even darker. So we have this back here. I'm going to call this actually contrast for now, so we know what it is. And we're going to come right on top. And we're going to give this, again, a final contrast. And this is, again, often what I play with, to have a few color layers right at the top when things sit together in the frame. And I can just play with that to try to massage them together into one photograph. So I'm going to call this final contrast. Right about there. Obviously the ground here doesn't blend well, so we're going to do the same thing as we did with the other image. Come into the cowboy here, call this for contrast. And then we're going to make it darker. Ooh, not bad. This is kind of fun. Exploring this all over again gives me some good impression of what this picture should be like. For now, we're just going to darken this, maybe give it a little bit of red, and we're going to fill that with black. To get black into the picture, we're going to click here, which resets it, and again we're going to inverse those right there, and that's our black tone. And then we're going to come in and sort of paint in right here. I'm going to put this cowboy here on pass through. Ooh, so quite a few layers here that affects it. Also what happened now was the hair. When I put this on normal and not a pass through, the hair of the horse showed up. So I'm going to put this horse hair outside of this folder right there. And there you see they pop back right in at this multiply. So let's zoom in on that so you can see what it does. We had the horsehair inside this folder when it was on pass through, which allowed all the layers to pass through it. But then when we put it on normal, it showed up right away. So when we come in here, put it outside on a multiply, let me see, there on the multiply, and it's outside of this folder, it then blends the horsehair beautifully into the background, overlaying it and multiplying the feel of it. So good blending layer to have and to use. By doing that though, I managed to put the ground blend onto the ground here, and you see immediately the cowboy feels like it's sitting in there a lot better. So I'm gonna keep on painting into this a tiny bit. So I cut this out and I placed him in there roughly, but it's not quite in the same position, I could tell. But you get the idea of what I want. But you get the idea of what I'm trying to do here. Again, it's finding those creases and crevices within the frame that would allow me to blend in there. So that's kind of what I've done. I mean, we could go through this again, but I'm not sure if you will learn something new to watch me sit here and blend through again these masks that will make this sit into the background. There's a little fall off in sharpness back there, and we would address that as well. Maybe cut that out or sharpen it up. So I think this feels pretty darn good. I'm just sitting there reassessing a little bit what this picture needs. I feel the sky has too much contrast compared to the bottom. It takes a little bit of attention really away from the guy in the landscape. And one of the things I like to do about that is to come down to the sky layers. And well, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can take this bottom anchor point and just push it up. And as you see me do this, the contrast disappears and it feels a tiny bit better. This is a lot of contrast to take out though. So it doesn't do... I'm looking for bending as I do this. And you see right in here, you're starting to get all this sort of noise almost. So as I do it, this stuff will probably get worse, but it's not too bad. So let's just start there. The other way to do it is to use a color fill layer and just put it on top. And we can do that real quick. Come here, do a solid color, and I like to use them in the yellowish tone, in a really pale yellow. So right in here, keeping it at normal, not setting this on color but on normal, and then just do an opacity. And by it just sitting on top, you start to get this really soft tone or contrast to it. So first we pumped up the contrast by, let me see, we did not pump up the contrast, we actually pumped up the bottom lever here, which will reduce our contrast, and then we did a fill layer which completely softened this. When you do this on normal but then reduces the opacity, you'll get this diffused overlay of color and tone, which now to me feels a lot better. The top is more coherent in contrast with the bottom. So let's just go back and forth so you can see what happened there. Here's the top and here's the bottom. So for some of you, you might say, oh my God, we love what you had before. That's perfect. If you do, then you know how to work with this, get your own flavor in there, and really embrace your own techniques and your own art when you sit here and retouch. This is really the process, and retouching truly is an art. It's manifesting the ideas through a software that you had when you took a picture, and it's definitely a tool that shapes the images afterwards as well. So there's a lot of contrast in our guy as well. Feel that's a little bit more than it should be maybe. So there's two ways to balance this. Either we add more contrast to the overall background, including the sky, which we have reduced, or we reduce the contrast of the guy. So let's start with doing this. We're going to come in here, pull down this anchor point, which will add a little bit more contrast in the sky. Then we're going to close the sky up. We're going to come into our backplate. And we're going to put a contrast layer on top here. Push this down and this up. Get a little bit more contrast there. Now you see the contrast in this area, so the blacks here start to be a little bit more in tune with what we have going on with our guy. He still feels a little vibrant though. So I'm going to reduce the contrast in him anyway. So in reducing the contrast, we're going to make an opposite S-curve. It needs to be maybe darker as well. There, does not feel bad. Let me see. Before, and after. I like the overall tones now in here matching what's around, but I don't like the contrast in his face. So we're going to come in here and we're just going to mask away what this curve change did. So now he's a lot brighter, which is a little bit too much. You're going to undo that, put 30% and just mask in just a tiny bit. I'm going to zoom in. Maybe we could play with this a little bit. Maybe it was too much. And we could bring some of the contrast back on the side and in the forehead, and just give him a highlight right in the face. Again, this guy is so stiff. Oh, fascinating. Okay, we're going to come up to our final contrast and push this a little bit more. Wow. I'm going to do one more thing here. We're going to select our gradient tool. We're going to come into our quick mask, and then we're just going to start at the top and create a gradient. So we're going to hold down the shift key at the same time, which will create a straight gradient. Now you can see I can do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it will go at 45-degree angles. We're going to do straight down at 90, and this will give us a beautiful gradient at the top. We're going to exit our quick mask. You're going to invert that selection, and at the top we're going to create another curve that will give us a gradient right at the top of the frame. Why doesn't it happen? The computer got a little stuck there, which will give us a gradient right at the top of the frame. Now you get to see what I was talking about, where we get a lot of banding right up in here in the sky. So we're going to start with adding some noise to this top curve here. We might not be able to use it because this was really quite bad, but let's see what we could do. We have the curve 6 layer here. We're going to call this top density. And we're going to come into our filter, and we need to select the mask first because it's the mask gradient that creates this. And we're going to give it some noise. I'm going to add noise, and 2 points, a lot better already, almost took it away. I'm going to add 3 and hit OK. Pretty much went away. It's just quite exciting. I'm going to look at this at 100% because often the screen teases you a little bit if you watch this at an odd number percentage. At 50% it works, 30% is tougher. So this is not bad. To change this, I would do 2 things. I would blur the sky a little bit and add a little bit of grain to the actual sky layer. But I think for now we're fine. Yeah, we see it here still at 25%. We see. At 100, it's still not perfect. So this is a question I often get, so I'm going to pay some attention to this. This is what I would do to get rid of it. I would come into my sky layer, and we're going to blur them a tiny bit. So we're going to go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we're going to do 0.4. Let's start there. And we're going to hit Command F, select the top one. Command F will produce the last filter done so that we just repeat the Gaussian blur. Now that we blurred the edges a little bit, we're going to add in some grain. So we're going to do the same. We're going to go filter, noise, add noise, and I like to think and hope that 2 would be enough. So you're going to start there, and you're going to do this again. It's still there a tiny bit. So 16.7, it's not a great percentage. 25 should be okay. It's better, but not great. So let's see what we have above here, if there's anything else. If you turn off the hue saturation, it gets better for sure. So I want to see what we could do to get these layers not fighting each other. Often these layers can fight against each other in some ways, because as you add more contrast in layers, you also add more saturation. So I have a lot of desaturation here. So maybe if you put these layers on luminosity instead of normal for the contrast part, maybe we could soften the saturation a bit. So let's look at this. This one, I'm going to come in and do luminosity. That will change the saturation a tiny bit. And then we're going to come into this layer, which mixes different things here. And you're going to undo that. You're going to come and copy this layer. And for the bottom, you're going to take away all the color. So I'm going to come in here. It's kind of nice, actually, that really warm tone. and undo this. And this then becomes a layer that only deals with contrast. Let me see, did I do everything? Yes. Oh, there's an anchor point here. I'm going to take that away. Now this only deals with contrast, which means we could put this on luminosity and hopefully take away a little bit extra pressure on the hue saturation layer. In this one, we're going to take away what we're doing with the contrast. So now we split this up beautifully with one only working on contrast and luminosity setting, and this one is only working on color. If you put all of this on luminosity, all the color changes we've done here wouldn't have any effect. So it's important to first split it up. So now there should be one less strain on the banding of this sky. And I want to see. You can tell we added a lot of noise to this, and it's not the best scenario. We could undo some of this by blurring our top curve a little bit. So maybe we soften this a tiny bit there. All right. I think we're close. Still, we see it a tiny bit, but at 100%, it's not really visible. So let's see what we've done. We started here, made it a lot darker. With that darkness did come the banding, but still beautiful too, but I do like it a little bit denser. So I think that's pretty darn close to where we want to be with this. We could maybe push the darkness a tiny bit more. Let's try it. Why not? We did a top density. We're going to do the same at the bottom. Create a little bit more of a nighttime feel here. We're going to invert that again. And here we have our curve. We're going to just push that down. And I like to do this often to bookmark the pictures in a way where we get a density on the top and a density on the bottom. You have an increased way of guiding the eye to the place you want it to be within the photograph. I do like this rock though, as it's an anchor point for the eye to travel up here and then along the ridge and then down along this river. So I want to make sure that we don't make this part too dark. We're going to undo actually ourselves right in this area. And I think we want to do the same as we did on the darker image, the bluer toned picture, and add some highlights right in here at the river. So we come in here at our curve, we push that up a little bit. Give it a little contrast. I'm going to fill it with black. And then we're just going to sort of paint in here to create a little bit more attention to the highlights that sit in the trees here. And also obviously to the river. Just a beautiful river bend. And as we were there, we met all these trout fishers. Some of them coming from far, far, far away. Some from Canada. There was a couple from Africa that was there to fish trout. So that's kind of fun. All right, so I still kind of feel like I want to push this a little bit deeper, and I think the guy's a little bit big, so we're gonna come here and make our cowboy maybe a tiny bit smaller. There's a little piece here that did not want to come along, so we're gonna unapply that, get our horse here with us. Make it a tiny bit smaller. Yeah, let's see what that does. If you do go more nighttime, maybe this guy shouldn't be as yellow as it is. So I'm going to take this blend copy here, which now is only color, and tone that color down a little bit more. I like this. And as I do that, maybe it feels too warm overall. So I'm going to come into our, maybe it's just a matter of turning this off. No, I'm going to come into the backplate. That's our contrast. I did not really use any color on the backplate. It was the way it was really. So come up here, pull some red out of it. The computer is coming a little slow here, so that was not a lot of reaction. So you're going to add this, and then you're going to come to our foreground, and we're going to do the same. I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to pull this down a tiny bit. Add a little red to it. Right in there. I think I should just put this on top here because it's affecting a lot of these layers. So putting it outside, I now can come down here and turn off this layer, which added the green. So now it's affecting this area, the foreground rocks and the valley and the mountains and our cowboy, because I put it outside of the folders and all the way to the top. Still think our cowboy could get a little darker. Or maybe it's just the face that feels too bright. So maybe I should start with undoing what I did there in the face. Before and after, I like it better natural without that highlight. The nose of the horse feels a little bright as well. So maybe we should try to bring this down overall. Starting to feel pretty darn good about this. Pretty darn good. I did this to see what it would happen if I added the contrast that I had to the background to the foreground as well. Just to see what it would be like. And I think I want to add a little bit more contrast to the foreground. We played around with this earlier, but that's the way it is. It's kind of morphing as I work along. Now I got to come in and add a little bit more contrast to the cowboy as well. And in this case, we have an opposite S-curve, which is decreasing contrast. So it's just to push back a little bit and get more contrast. So I think I'm really happy. I'm going to try to do a couple of things. As I explore, maybe we'll tone down the saturation overall. So it's quite not as vibrant. Like that. And maybe we can push this contrast a little further. I also want to come into the sky. As I explore this, the lighter sky feels a tiny bit better, like that. And as I make it lighter, maybe I could push just the top down. So we can work on that in a second. I'm going to decrease the percentage here again. Keep bringing some more blue in there. And then we can come up here and bring this back up. As I made the sky lighter, we could bring down just the top. And with that, I'm starting to feel really quite good about what we have created. I keep thinking that I'm too dark, but maybe I should just push this. That did not look good. We're going to keep this mid-tones alone. Maybe we'll do the opposite there. So what we have created in front of us is early morning. The light is just hitting the top of the mountain. There's a lot of symbolism in that, as in we're heading for something that's brighter, vibrancy is coming, skies are happy. So I think this is our story here. We got the lantern in there. As you remember, the stands and stuff came into here, and I retouched those out earlier. So that's one more step that I'm not going to take you through for this. But overall, I feel pretty good about where things stand. Maybe a little bit more contrast now in our cowboy. So maybe I'll just do a little percentage here, because the less I have of this curve, the less effective it's going to be, and it's actually doing less contrast. So if you do this, we get some more contrast in the front. I think that's it, truly. I could maybe explore this a little bit to put the pieces better together. Now that I took the blue up in the sky, I could push this yellow a little bit again, so don't feel so bad. All right. As I'm tinkering and as I'm exploring, so should you. This picture, or any picture really, will never really be quite done. Photoshop is so rich, so deep, that you can retouch and retouch and retouch and never really say that you're done exploring. So I'd say with this, I feel I have shown another example of what you can accomplish when it comes to color. We have the dark blue, moon is out, it's really nighttime, and then we have this where the sun has come up, the palette is a lot warmer. You saw early on what the color temperature did. We did not change anything about the pictures. It was only the light quality that set the tone for what would follow in the retouch. So again, we don't come to a picture and say, oh, I want to create that and that feeling. The feeling was truly created when we photographed it in the color palette and the light that we chose, and then we chose to enhance that in Photoshop. Now, a lot of enhancing here in these pictures was not as easy as I thought. It was not just putting the horse there, not just showing up, taking a picture. It just changed a lot. So I think we made more work for ourselves, but I also think that we managed to create beautiful work given the parameters that we had. As I talk to you, wrapping this up, there's a few things that I see that I think will benefit this picture. I'm going to come into the cowboy, and I have this ground blend right in here. I'm just going to come here in the red and tone down the red a little bit. Down the red, like that. And then I'm going to add some of this to the butt of the horse, because this feels too bright. My eye keep going there. So this ground darkness, we're going to add that there, and to the nose here as well. Didn't quite do it for me, so we're going to try to do that again. I'm going to come into our quick mask tool and just select the white parts here, white parts here, and we're going to invert those, create another curve which will allow us to pull those down. Those highlights there is reflective quality from the light that was enveloping us later in the day when we shot this piece. Remember, he stood right here, and then the sun came right on him, and then we moved it into the shadow where we really got these pictures that I felt were the strongest of the day. So with this, I would crop it a little bit maybe, so that it became more about him. Maybe I would come in and crop this right along here. Let me see. Maybe we'll do, something like this. It's hard to let this go when you're in it and when you're exploring. It's a lot about being in the zone, being in the flow, and that's kind of where you want to get to when you retouch. You just want to let the picture speak to you and kind of get into it. So I just want to tone down this back side here too a little bit. As I tone down the butt of the horse, I think this back end here can take a little bit more density right in here. And we do need to retouch away that bright spot back there. So we're going to come into our foreground, and it's probably sitting, no, it's in our backplate. I'm going to come down in here, and it must be sitting here. This piece belongs to it. So we're going to come in and just retouch that away. This is part of the strobe that we tried for a few frames, spilling onto the horse that was here. So I guess maybe the easiest way to do this is to bring in some of the plate that we used to take this away, like that. again, we're finding an edge that we could use. So right about there maybe. All right, better. So there's a few white spots that I would tone down. Would tone down this, tone down that, maybe even take away this river bend, which I love, but it seems a little distracting right in there. It doesn't help the eye flow away. It just creates a little clutter. So I'll probably do that too. But we have retouched now 2 pretty decent pictures. I think I've shown you the examples. I think the learning is there. So we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to pull up both these images on the screen and we're going to talk about some assignments, what I think you guys should explore to learn something from this process. It will be related to color, and I'll get back to you in a few minutes talking more about that. Thank you for following along.